Trump's message to Dr. S.J. Shankar, being described as a secret diplomatic signal, highlights the unique nature of how politics and diplomacy often function behind the curtain of official statements. In traditional diplomacy, communications between leaders or high-ranking officials are delivered through established channels with carefully crafted language that is approved by multiple layers of government machinery. This process ensures that nothing controversial, misinterpreted, or unpredictable reaches the global stage. But Trump has always stood apart from this model. He thrived on creating moments that bypassed the formal machinery of governance, sending signals that felt raw, direct, and often personal. This is exactly what happened when the message was directed at India's external affairs minister. It wasn't the standard protocol of state-to-state dialogue. It was an intentional signal suggesting that Trump wanted to establish a deeper line of communication with the man shaping India's foreign policy trajectory. The importance of this kind of signal lies in the fact that it holds symbolic value that sometimes outweighs the impact of official government notes. Diplomats and analysts know that when a leader communicates outside traditional frameworks, it is often meant to show urgency or sincerity. In this case, Trump's message to Jay Shankar can be interpreted as a declaration that he sees India not as a junior partner, but as a power with agency, and that Jay Shankar personally represents that power. Such recognition itself is strategic because it implies that the U.S. needs India more than ever in the unfolding global chessboard. This elevates Jay Shankar's stature even further in global eyes, since he is seen not merely as an Indian minister, but as a statesman who commands direct acknowledgement from figures like Trump. To understand why this kind of signal shocked so many observers, one must look at how rare it is for a former president to engage in this manner. Usually, once out of office, American leaders refrain from sending direct messages that could contradict the current administration. But Trump's decision to send a signal to Jay Shankar suggests he still sees himself as an active player in shaping U.S. foreign policy narratives. The message, therefore, wasn't only about U.S. India ties. It was also about Trump positioning himself as a parallel force to Biden, showing the world that he still has influence. For India, this creates an unusual scenario where both the current administration and a former president are signaling interest, giving New Delhi a unique diplomatic advantage. The subtlety of the communication cannot be ignored. It was not broadcast publicly in grand speeches, but rather whispered through channels that ensured only those who needed to know would grasp its meaning. This makes it more powerful because the ambiguity invites speculation, and speculation itself creates leverage. Analysts will dissect every word, every nuance, every gesture tied to this message, and in doing so, they keep Trump's influence alive in the discourse. Meanwhile, for Jay Shankar, it signals trust and importance, a message that says you are not only relevant, you are central to what comes next. This boosts India's negotiating hand in trade talks, defense cooperation, and multilateral forums. The timing of the signal also matters deeply. In a world where tensions with China are escalating, where the Ukraine conflict has reshaped global alliances, and where supply chain security is being rethought, India's position is pivotal. By sending a signal at this time, Trump is effectively reminding both India and the U.S. audience that he understands the stakes, and that under his leadership, America would move differently than it does under Biden. The message itself becomes a statement of intent, a preview of how Trump would act if he were back in office. It also pressures the current administration indirectly because it raises questions: will Biden let Trump outmaneuver him on foreign relations? Or will he now intensify efforts to secure India's trust? Ultimately, the secret diplomatic signal was less about the exact words spoken and more about the act of sending it. In international politics, sometimes the gesture carries more weight than the content. By directing a personal assurance to Jay Shankar, Trump demonstrated that diplomacy in the 21st century is as much about personal recognition and trust as it is about formal treaties. The signal wasn't just about bilateral ties. It was about showing that Trump sees India as a co-pilot in shaping the future world order, and Jay Shankar as the man steering that ship on behalf of India. India's rising role in global politics has been one of the most significant shifts of the 21st century, and Trump's message to Jay Shankar highlighted this reality with unmistakable clarity. For decades, India was often viewed through the lens of a developing nation, a country with great potential but limited influence compared to global giants like the United States, China, or Russia. However, the last decade has redefined India's position on the world stage. With a rapidly growing economy, a massive demographic advantage, strong military capabilities, and a diplomatic presence that has grown sharper under leaders like Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Foreign Minister S.J. Shankar, India is no longer seen as a peripheral player. Instead, it is being recognized as a central force in shaping the new global order. Trump's decision to direct a personal message to Jai Shankar reflects this recognition, showing that India is not only on Washington's radar, but also viewed as indispensable to the future balance of power. The rise of India's influence is most clearly visible in the Indo-Pacific region, where it has become a counterweight to China's aggressive expansionism. The U.S. has long sought reliable partners to secure maritime freedom, trade routes, and regional stability, and no country fits that role better than India. With initiatives like the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, Quad, involving the U.S., India, Japan, and Australia, New Delhi has stepped into a leadership role in maintaining a balance of power in Asia. Trump, who during his presidency emphasized building a stronger Indo-Pacific strategy, saw India as a natural ally in countering Beijing's rise. By sending a direct message to Jai Shankar now, Trump reinforced the idea that India's growing role is not just regional but global, and that its decisions will significantly impact how power is distributed in the coming decades economically too. India's ascent has drawn global attention. With its economy now among the top 5 in the world and its market offering opportunities for trade and investment, India has positioned itself as a vital partner for countries looking to diversify supply chains away from China. The world saw the vulnerabilities of global dependence during the COVID-19 pandemic, and India emerged as both a pharmaceutical hub and a technological partner, underscoring its importance in maintaining stability. Trump's recognition of India's role through a personal diplomatic signal is directly tied to this shift because he understands that future U.S. prosperity is linked with tapping into India's economic rise. This recognition is also symbolic of how India is now treated less as a developing partner and more as a peer power, one that can negotiate with the U.S. From a position of strength, another important element of India's rising global role is its ability to maintain strategic autonomy in foreign policy. Unlike many nations that align strictly with one bloc or the other, India has mastered the art of balancing relationships. It engages closely with the U.S., collaborates with Russia on defense and energy, and simultaneously holds a pragmatic dialogue with China despite tensions. This independence gives India unique leverage as it is not beholden to any single global power. Trump's decision to bypass formalities and directly reach out to Jai Shankar is an acknowledgement of this autonomy. He recognizes that India does not follow instructions from Washington or Moscow, but acts in its own interest. And for that reason, it must be courted with respect rather than pressured. On the geopolitical front, India has also become a leading voice for the global South, championing the concerns of developing countries on issues like climate change, sustainable development, and equitable trade practices. Its presidency of the G20 further cemented its image as a bridge between advanced economies and emerging nations. Trump's message, therefore, carried layered meaning, suggesting that he not only values India as a strategic partner, but also sees it as a leader that can amplify U.S. influence across Asia, Africa, and beyond. Jai Shankar's global standing as a skilled diplomat further strengthens this position, as he has repeatedly articulated India's views with clarity and firmness on international platforms. India's rise also cannot be separated from its military capabilities, particularly its modernization efforts and its growing role as a security provider in the Indian Ocean. The U.S. understands that the ability to counter threats in this region depends heavily on India's participation. By signaling directly to Jai Shankar, Trump was indirectly signaling to the Indian establishment that he values India's defense partnerships and would strengthen them further if given the chance. It is not just about weapons sales or joint exercises. It is about building a long-term strategic foundation in which India is treated as an equal partner in securing peace and stability. Ultimately, India's rise is reshaping the global narrative of power distribution. For Trump, acknowledging this reality was not just a matter of diplomacy, but a strategic foresight. By recognizing India's role through a personal and unconventional message, he reinforced the idea that the U.S. cannot afford to overlook New Delhi's influence. In the unfolding story of global power shifts, India is not a background character. It is emerging as one of the main actors, and the world, including leaders like Trump, is adjusting to this new reality. Trump's strategy when it comes to India has always been distinct from the traditional U.S. foreign policy approach, and his secret message to Dr. S. Jaishankar underscores this difference with clarity. Unlike many American leaders who have seen India primarily as a balancing partner in Asia, Trump views India as a cornerstone of his vision for global power realignment. He believes in building partnerships not just for symbolic reasons, but for tangible leverage in trade, defense, and geopolitics. His approach toward New Delhi was visible during his time in office when he prioritized personal relationships with leaders and sought to redefine alliances based on transactional strength rather than long-standing bureaucratic frameworks. In this sense, his outreach to Jaishankar reflects a continuation of that same philosophy, a way of signaling that India occupies a central place in his geopolitical blueprint. One of the core elements of Trump's strategy has always been to counterbalance China. During his presidency, he consistently challenged Beijing on trade imbalances, intellectual property theft, and military assertiveness in the South China Sea. In this contest, India's role was never secondary. Trump understood that India is one of the few nations with both the demographic weight and military capacity to check China's ambitions. By directly addressing Jaishankar, Trump is effectively making it clear that in his vision, India is not just a regional partner, but a strategic pillar in the broader Indo-Pacific framework. This stands in contrast to Biden's more multilateral and cautious approach, which has sometimes frustrated New Delhi. Trump's strategy, bold and direct, sends a message that under his leadership, the U.S. would prioritize bilateral strength with India rather than dilute it through layers of bureaucracy. Trade and economic relations also form a vital part of Trump's strategy. He has always emphasized deals that he believes serve U.S. interests while pushing allies to commit more in return. With India, however, he showed an unusual degree of flexibility, recognizing that the relationship was about more than immediate trade deficits. Instead, he focused on long-term gains, such as securing technology partnerships, energy cooperation, and defense purchases that would benefit both nations. His message to Jaishankar can be interpreted as a reminder that he intends to continue this approach, positioning economic cooperation as a critical foundation of U.S.-India ties. He views India not just as a buyer of American products, but as a long-term collaborator in reshaping global supply chains, reducing reliance on China, and creating new networks of economic resilience. Trump's strategy is also deeply personal. Unlike leaders who rely heavily on institutional diplomacy, Trump often preferred to establish relationships directly with the individuals he believed mattered most. During his presidency, this was evident in how he engaged with world leaders from North Korea to Saudi Arabia. In the case of India, directing his message personally to Jaishankar rather than simply through official channels to the Indian government shows how he values the personal dimension of diplomacy. It suggests he sees Jaishankar as not just a minister, but as a key architect of India's foreign policy, someone whose influence shapes the global perception of India's role. By bypassing formalities, Trump demonstrates that his strategy is built on trust, recognition, and symbolic gestures that resonate far more deeply than conventional diplomatic notes. This personal and strategic alignment also ties into Trump's broader vision of power politics. He believes in strong nations making bold decisions, in sovereignty being respected above globalist structures, and in bilateral ties carrying more weight than multilateral negotiations. India, with its tradition of strategic autonomy and independent decision-making, aligns perfectly with this worldview. Jaishankar's firm articulation of India's interests at global platforms mirrors Trump's own emphasis on putting national interests first. By signaling directly to Jaishankar, Trump is essentially saying that he respects India's stance and sees it as compatible with his own model of international engagement. This makes India an ideal partner in his eyes, not one to be pressured, but one to be courted and empowered. The strategy also contains a domestic angle for Trump. By highlighting his closeness to India and his acknowledgement of its importance, he appeals to the large Indian diaspora in the United States, a community that is politically influential and economically significant. His previous rallies, including the famous Howdy Modi, event in Houston demonstrated his awareness of how ties with India can translate into political capital at home. By keeping this narrative alive through messages like the one directed at Jaishankar, Trump reinforces his image as a leader who values and strengthens U.S.-India relations, setting himself apart from Biden in the eyes of both American voters and Indian observers. At its core, Trump's strategy is about leverage, influence, and recognition. By reaching out to Jaishankar in such a pointed manner, he signals his intention to treat India as a partner of equal weight, one that is not just important for the present, but essential for the future global order. It is a move that combines strategic foresight, personal diplomacy, and political calculation, reflecting his belief that the path to countering rivals like China and asserting American dominance runs directly through a powerful and rising India. Jaishankar's influence on global diplomacy has grown to such an extent that even leaders like Donald Trump recognize him as more than just India's foreign minister. He has become the intellectual and strategic voice of India's rise, a diplomat who does not mince words and who articulates India's foreign policy with rare clarity and precision. His sharp responses to global criticism, his ability to negotiate on equal terms with world powers, and his calm yet firm presence on international platforms have made him a statesman admired and at times feared by his counterparts. When Trump chose to send a message directly to Jaishankar, bypassing conventional channels, it was an acknowledgement of this influence. It was a signal that Trump understood Jaishankar to be the man steering India's diplomatic course, someone whose words and actions now carry the weight of a rising power. Jaishankar's style of diplomacy is unique because it blends pragmatism with assertiveness. For decades, India was often seen as overly cautious, reluctant to assert itself in global matters. That perception has changed dramatically under Jaishankar's stewardship. He has repeatedly shown that India will no longer play the role of a silent observer, but instead will take bold positions that align with its national interest. Whether it is defending India's ties with Russia despite Western pressure, or firmly responding to questions about India's human rights record, Jaishankar has built a reputation for standing his ground with dignity. This has made him one of the most respected diplomats of the era, someone who commands attention wherever he speaks. Trump's recognition of this stature by sending a personal assurance highlights how individual leadership in diplomacy can change the perception of an entire nation. His influence also extends to how India is now perceived in the great power rivalry between the U.S. and China. Jaishankar has positioned India as an independent power that cooperates with Washington, but does not take instructions from it. This balancing act has impressed many in the West, as it shows a kind of sovereignty that is increasingly rare in international politics. For Trump, who values strength and independence in partners, Jaishankar embodies the qualities of a leader who understands power dynamics and knows how to use them. It is no surprise then that Trump would see him as the figure most deserving of a direct message. Rather than limiting communication to routine exchanges with bureaucratic officials, Jaishankar's influence gives India leverage because when he speaks, the world pays attention. And when he negotiates, counterparts know that his words are not easily swayed. Jaishankar's global presence has also reshaped the idea of Indian diplomacy as intellectual as well as practical. His book, The India Way, and his speeches across global forums provide a philosophical framework for India's foreign policy, where India seeks to lead not by aligning itself blindly with one camp, but by carving out a unique space that reflects its civilizational depth and modern aspirations. This intellectual leadership adds another layer to his influence because it shows that India is not just reacting to world events, but shaping its own narrative. Trump's decision to reach out to him can be seen as an acknowledgement of this thought leadership, an understanding that Jaishankar is not only a negotiator, but also a strategist who is defining India's worldview for decades to come. Another dimension of Jaishankar's influence is his ability to command respect even when he is challenging powerful nations. He has repeatedly demonstrated that India is willing to say no when its interests are not served, whether in trade negotiations with the U.S., or in standing firm on oil purchases from Russia. This refusal to bend under pressure is a quality Trump admires because it mirrors his own negotiating style. Trump respects those who hold their ground, and Jaishankar's consistency makes him an ideal partner in Trump's vision of bilateral strength. This is why the message Trump sent was not just symbolic, but deeply strategic. Acknowledging that Jaishankar is the man who represents India's new confidence, the impact of Jaishankar's diplomacy has also been visible in how India's voice resonates with the global South. He has positioned India as a leader for nations that often feel excluded from Western-led frameworks, giving India moral as well as strategic authority. By doing so, Jaishankar has expanded India's influence beyond traditional power corridors, making it a country that can speak for multiple constituencies across the globe. This makes him indispensable not only for India, but also for leaders like Trump, who seek to build alliances that stretch beyond the West. By reaching out directly, Trump is aligning himself with a diplomat who has successfully created space for India in both developed and developing worlds, a rare achievement in today's fractured geopolitical climate. Jaishankar's ability to handle pressure, articulate clear positions, and expand India's global role is why he has become one of the most influential diplomats of the 21st century. His influence is not just about representing India's policies. It is about reshaping how the world perceives India itself. Leaders like Trump recognize that to engage with India effectively, one must engage with Jaishankar because he embodies the strength, clarity, and independence that define India's current diplomatic posture. The global shockwave that followed Trump's secret message to Jaishankar is not difficult to understand once the context of global diplomacy is considered. In international politics, messages are rarely accidental. Every gesture, every word, and every signal carries layers of meaning. And when a former president of the United States chooses to bypass the usual systems of communication and send a direct assurance to India's foreign minister, it disrupts the predictable patterns of diplomacy. The shock came not only from what the message implied, but also from the way it was delivered. Diplomats and analysts across Washington, New Delhi, and beyond immediately realized that this was not just a casual outreach, but a statement with the power to shift narratives. The unusual nature of the move forced observers to reevaluate the current balance of power and raised questions about where U.S.-India relations might be headed if Trump were to return to power. The first element of the shock was the fact that Trump acted in defiance of convention. Traditionally, leaders who are out of office remain cautious about intervening in ongoing foreign policy, especially when it risks contradicting the sitting president's agenda. For Trump to send a message that signaled his own stance toward India while Biden continues to manage official relations was unprecedented. It created confusion in Washington about whether India might now consider Trump's position as seriously as Biden's. This duality was enough to unsettle policymakers because it blurred the lines of authority and introduced an unpredictable element into U.S.-India relations. For global analysts, it highlighted how Trump's influence continues to ripple through world politics, even when he is not in office. The second element of shock was the target of the message. Jaishankar, as India's external affairs minister, is already regarded as one of the most formidable diplomats in the world. But Trump's decision to address him directly, rather than making a broad statement about India, signaled that Jaishankar personally holds the key to shaping India's global strategy. This elevated his stature even further, making him not only a national figure, but a global one. The message essentially told the world that Trump saw Jaishankar as the true voice of India in international affairs, a recognition that is rare for a foreign minister and usually reserved for heads of state. The acknowledgement reverberated across global capitals, with many realizing that India's diplomatic strength now rests not only in its prime minister, but also in the sharp mind and steady hand of its foreign minister. Another layer of the shock was its implications for the Indo-Pacific rivalry. With China's rise, the U.S. has been seeking stronger partners in Asia, and India stands at the center of that strategy. Trump's signal suggested that under his vision, the partnership with India would not just continue but intensify, perhaps even in ways that Biden has not pursued. This unsettled Beijing because it indicated that Trump was already plotting a more aggressive Indo-Pacific policy with India as a primary pillar. It also caused concern in Moscow as India's balancing act between Russia and the West is delicate, and a stronger U.S.-India alignment could tilt that balance. In Europe, too, policymakers began asking whether India would become the decisive power in Asia that determines the trajectory of global power struggles. The shock also stemmed from the tone of the message. which was described not as a typical diplomatic note, but as a personal assurance. This made it seem less like an institutional outreach and more like a private conversation between two strategic minds. Such personalization in diplomacy is rare and carries weight because it suggests authenticity. For many observers, this hinted that Trump was attempting to build a channel of trust with Jay Shankar that transcended official government to government relations. That in itself is unsettling for traditional diplomacy because it creates alternative lines of communication outside the established framework, giving Trump an edge. Even without formal power, the reaction in India was equally significant. For Indian policymakers, the message underscored how central their role has become in global affairs. It was not only recognition of India's rising power, but also proof that the U.S., regardless of who leads it, sees India as indispensable. Yet it also raised questions about how India should navigate relations with Washington in the near future. Should India double down on building stronger ties with Biden's administration? Or should it prepare for Trump's possible return by keeping channels warm with him as well? This strategic dilemma is part of what made the message so impactful because it placed India in a rare position of leverage where both current and former U.S. leaders are competing for its partnership. In the global media, the story of Trump's outreach spread quickly with headlines emphasizing its unconventional nature. Analysts debated whether it was a political stunt, a serious strategic signal, or a mix of both. Regardless of interpretation, the outcome was the same. Trump had managed to dominate the narrative once again, placing himself at the center of the U.S.-India conversation and reminding the world that his influence cannot be ignored. For a former president, this is a powerful position, and for India, it is a reminder of how its diplomatic choices are increasingly shaping the world order. The shockwave, therefore, was not confined to Washington or New Delhi, but rippled outward into Beijing, Moscow, Brussels, and beyond. Every global capital took note because the implications were far-reaching. If Trump were to return, his signal to Jai Shankar would be seen as the foundation of a renewed U.S.-India strategy, one that could reshape alliances, trade flows, and security arrangements across the world. Even if he does not return, the mere fact that such a message was sent has already changed perceptions, creating new expectations about how India and the U.S. might interact in the future. The future implications of Trump's secret message to Jai Shankar reach far beyond the immediate headlines and speculation. When a former U.S. president signals to India's foreign minister in such a direct and unconventional manner, it is not simply a gesture of respect or recognition, but a calculated move that could reshape how both nations approach their relationship in the years ahead. If Trump returns to power, the message can be interpreted as a blueprint for how he intends to deal with India, placing it at the center of his foreign policy vision and positioning it as a co-architect of a new global order. Even if he does not return, the message itself has already planted seeds of expectation that India will continue to be a decisive factor in the global balance of power, making the implications of this act long-term and multi-layered. One of the most immediate implications is the potential recalibration of U.S.-India relations. Traditionally, America has sought partnerships with India through carefully negotiated frameworks and multilateral arrangements, but Trump's approach signals something different. It suggests a pivot toward a more bilateral and personal model of diplomacy where the two countries deal directly with each other at the highest levels without overdependence on bureaucratic structures. This could lead to faster agreements on defense, trade, and technology sharing, as Trump prefers deals that can be framed as bold achievements rather than drawn-out negotiations. For India, this would mean greater access to U.S. support on issues such as military modernization, counterterrorism cooperation, and energy partnerships, while also reinforcing its independence in global decision-making. Another implication lies in the Indo-Pacific theater, where tensions with China continue to escalate. Trump's message to Jai Shankar, given its timing and tone, can be read as a preview of his strategy to confront China more aggressively with India as a central ally. This means that future U.S.-India cooperation under Trump could go beyond symbolic gestures and expand into deeper military integration, intelligence sharing, and joint exercises aimed at deterring Beijing's expansionism. India's geographic location, naval capabilities, and political will make it an indispensable partner in containing Chinese influence. By building a closer bond with Jaishankar now, Trump is laying the foundation for a more assertive Indo-Pacific coalition in the future, one that could redefine security dynamics in Asia and beyond economically. The implications are equally significant. The world is witnessing a gradual decoupling from China in critical supply chains, and India is emerging as one of the strongest alternatives. Trump, who has always emphasized economic nationalism and reducing dependency on Beijing, clearly understands this. His message signals that India will play a crucial role in restructuring global trade networks, particularly in sectors such as technology, pharmaceuticals, and energy. If Trump were to return to power, he would likely push for trade deals that elevate India's role in these supply chains, ensuring that both countries benefit economically while reducing China's dominance. This could mark a new era of U.S.-India economic cooperation, with long-term consequences for global markets. The message also carries implications for global alliances. India has always maintained a policy of strategic autonomy, balancing ties with the US, Russia, and other partners without being tied to any single bloc. Trump's outreach to Jaishankar suggests that he not only respects this independence, but intends to leverage it. By acknowledging Jaishankar personally, he shows that he values India's ability to act as a swing power, capable of influencing outcomes across multiple fronts, from the G20 to BRICS to the UN. This could lead to a future where US-India relations are not defined by dependency, but by partnership, where both nations collaborate as equals in shaping multilateral forums and addressing global crises. For India, this raises its global stature even further, while for the US, it creates a reliable ally in an increasingly multipolar world. The domestic implications in both countries are worth noting as well. For Trump, strengthening his image as a leader who prioritizes India enhances his appeal among the Indian American diaspora, a community with growing political and economic influence. For India, the message validates its rising position on the world stage and gives its policymakers more leverage in negotiations with the current U.S. administration. The fact that both current and former American leaders are vying for India's trust puts New Delhi in a uniquely advantageous position, allowing it to extract greater concessions and benefits from Washington regardless of who is in power. This dual courtship could shape India's foreign policy choices for years to come. Finally, the implications stretch into the symbolic realm of power politics. The act of Trump addressing Jaishankar directly rather than the Indian government as a whole sends a signal that diplomacy is becoming increasingly personalized. This sets a precedent where individual leaders and ministers can hold as much sway as institutions in shaping international relations. If this trend continues, it could redefine how diplomacy is conducted in the modern era, making trust between individuals as important as treaties between states. Jaishankar's role, already elevated by this message, could become even more significant in shaping how India positions itself as a global leader, while Trump's approach demonstrates how future leaders may bypass formal channels to create direct lines of influence that shock the traditional system.